Ever since art became part of our society, artists from across the globe ranging from Da Vinci to Van Gogh and your average guy like me have been using brushes of all sorts to create different styles of artworks. But today, things are a bit different, because today I'll be attempting photo manipulation without ever touching the brush tool. So let's see how it goes. So I started with this black background and then I added the stock image of this guy right on top of it, which is like the base image of this whole artwork, if you will, and you will figure out why as we move along. And after that I placed this image on top, which I guess is like the image of the Milky Way, I think. And then I rotated the image by 90 degrees, after which I increased the size of it so that it fit the screen. And after that I turned the layer blend mode to screen. And then I stared at the screen for some time and I realized that the sky was a bit too bright, but I wanted it to be a bit darker. So I tried out different blending modes and I finally decided to go with lighten, which is like a slight variation of screen, but it made the image a bit darker, which was exactly the effect that I was going for. And after that I added a layer on top of it, and because we can't use the brush tool at all, I picked the gradient tool and I reduced the opacity of the gradient to about 60%. And then by choosing black as the foreground color, I added a gradient on top and bottom. And after that I turned the layer blend mode to soft light. And as you can see, it makes either sides of the image a bit darker. And after that I added the main subject. You know what, I guess it depends on how you look at it. I mean, the sky could be the main subject or it could be this person. But anyway, what I did here is that I used the pen tool to make a selection of this element. And this is gonna take some time, so I'm gonna fast forward this process. And once the selection was done, I copied it onto a new layer, and then after that I placed it into position. And once I was satisfied with the position of the main subject, I started adding all the other elements one by one, starting off with this section of grass, which is like a PNG that I downloaded from Envato Elements. Do you call it a section of grass or is it something else? You know what, never mind that, moving on. So once I added that, I copied the grass onto a new layer, and I increased the size of it to make it seem like as if she was standing in a field of grass. And you kinda know what's gonna happen next, right? And once I was satisfied with the position of all sections of grass, I put all of them into a group. And then I added a hue saturation adjustment layer on top. And after that I turned the hue to plus 37, the saturation to minus 45, and most importantly the lightness to minus 72. And after that I moved the elements around to get a good idea of what kind of composition that I want to go for. And then I took one of the sections of grass from within this group and I brought it all the way down here so that the grass was actually behind the model. And the reason why I did this was to add some depth to the image, a depth of field, if you will. Sorry about that. And then I added the same hue saturation adjustment layer to this section of grass as well. And after that I went back to the grass group and I kept adding more and more sections of grass. And then I turned the subject layer into a smart object and I tilted the subject ever so slightly because in my mind for some reason this looked much cooler. I simply don't know why. And after that I added a hue saturation adjustment layer on top. And then I clipped it to the subject layer, and this time around I decreased the lightness to minus 84 and I left the other values at 0. And finally it's time for some blend mode magic. So for that what I did here is that I added this image right beneath all the elements, which is right above this gradient. And then I increased the size of the image and I tilted it slightly so that it fit the composition that I was going for. And once that was done, I turned the layer blend mode to overlay. And after that I added another image of a sky, which is this image of a sunset. And then I increased the size of it and I placed it quite centrally. And once that was done, I added a layer mask to it and I selected the gradient tool, and by using black as the foreground color, I got rid of the top portion of the image by painting in black in the layer mask, and that in theory works similar to painting in black in the layer mask using a brush. So it's kinda similar, but we can't use a brush, so you know, gotta use something. And then I moved the image a little bit more to the bottom, and you will see that I'll be moving all these elements quite a bit as the video goes on. And then I added more gradients and I moved the two images of the sky around until it fit the right composition in my head. And after that I added a layer all the way on top, and by using this dark purple color as the foreground color, I drew a gradient from bottom to top, and I reduced its opacity to about 43%. And on top of that layer, I added another layer, and this time by using violet/purple color as the foreground color, I added another gradient from bottom to top. And this time I turned the layer blend mode to lighten, after which I reduced the opacity to about 19%. And then I brought the image of the sunset down just a little bit, which, like I said before, you'll see me do quite a bit, so don't worry about that. And then I went back to the first gradient that I added right on top of the sky, and then I added another layer on top of it, and this time by using a lighter shade of purple, I drew another gradient from bottom to top, which kind of completely changed the outlook of the sky. And then I added another layer in between these two gradients, and guess what? I added yet another gradient. Shock, right? And this time around, for a change, I added a gradient from top to bottom by using black as the foreground color. And then I reduced its opacity to about 80%, and keep in mind that all these gradients at the bottom, because they were added below the foreground elements, it only affects the sky. And then I added another layer below the purple gradient, and then I created another purple gradient from bottom to top. And because I like this one better than the last one, I made the other one invisible. And unsurprisingly, I moved on to adding another gradient. Well, this is what happens when you are not allowed to use the brush tool. So I added this black gradient, and I made sure that it only affected the top portion of the image. And then I turned the layer blend mode to soft light, and after that I reduced the opacity of the layer to about 17%. And right now the layer blend mode of the power lines as well as the lampposts are set to overlay, but I want to change that back to normal. Not for the sky, but just for the lampposts and the wires. So for that, I went back to the original image, and using the pen tool, I started selecting the lampposts one by one, starting off with this one on the left. And again, this is gonna take a while, so I'm gonna fast forward this. So once I was done, I loaded the selection onto a new layer, and I placed it between the grass and the sky elements. And then I went ahead and did the exact same thing for the lamppost on the right as well. And you kind of see where this is going now, right? And I'm gonna do the same thing with the other lampposts as well. And after that, I moved on to the next element, which were the power lines. So I started out with this power line, and it didn't take me long to understand that I was making life difficult for myself. So I tried a different method to add the power lines. So I created a path along the power line using the pen tool. And then I right clicked and I chose stroke path using black as the foreground color. This is kind of like using the brush, but I'm not technically cheating because I'm not touching the brush tool, so we're good. And then I went ahead and did the exact same thing for the other power lines as well. And I also manually added some power lines and lampposts in the background as well. And after that, I added this orange-yellow gradient above the horizon, right on top of the original sky image. And then I went ahead and I selected all the power lines and all the lampposts, and I put all of them into a group. And then for good measure, I added some more power lines as well. And then I went back to the original sky image and I added a Gaussian blur, and I set its value to about 1.3. And then I brought another image of a sky with some really nice looking clouds. And then I turned the layer blending mode to multiply. So from this image, I only needed the cloud at the bottom. So in order to get rid of everything else except for the cloud, I went to the blend if option and I made some adjustments. And then as usual, I added a layer mask, and using the gradient tool and black as the foreground color, I painted with black in the layer mask, which erased the unnecessary bits. And then I moved the cloud around to fit the composition of the image. And then I reduced the opacity of the layer to about 83%. And then I used another image of clouds, and by using similar techniques like before, and trying out different blending modes as well, I added more clouds. Alright, so then I repeated the process once again, but this time with a different set of clouds. And if you are wondering what kind of effect that I'm going for, so basically I want to create something similar to what you see here on the left, because I think it looks really cool. And then I brought back this image and I selected some clouds from this as well. And then I kind of repeated the same process again, so I'm gonna fast forward this process. And because I was working with different kinds of clouds, I had to change the blending mode of some of the cloud layers to overlay and some of them to multiply. And I also had to change the opacity of the layers as well, depending on where I was placing the clouds. And as you can see, the clouds are creating this nice twirling effect. So basically that's the effect that I was going for. And I also had to change the shape of some clouds using puppet warp so that it fit the composition that I was going for. And there we go. And that was the cloud effect pretty much done. So after that, I added this image of a sunset and I added it right below the clouds and stuff that we just added. And I also made sure that the horizon of this image matched with the one that I was creating. And then I turned the blending mode to overlay, after which I added a layer mask to it. And as usual, by using black as the foreground color, I added a black gradient from top to bottom in the layer mask. And then I repeated the process a few more times until I was satisfied with the result. And the whole point of this image was to add a source of light. And then I tilted the model a little bit, because like I said, I was thinking about an anime or something. And then I added more sections of grass behind the model, hoping to give the image a little bit more depth. I then zoomed in and I cleaned up some of the unnecessary bits from the image. And after that, here we go again, I tilted the model a little bit more to the right. And by pressing Ctrl or Command, I clicked on one of the layers of the background grass to load the selection. And in a layer right beneath the group that has all the background grass in it, I filled the loaded selection by using this color, which is like a sunset reddish orange color. And then I moved the new layer a little bit to the right to create some rim light. And then I went ahead and did the exact same thing for the other sections of grass as well. And just like what I did here with the grass, I had to improvise the highlights on the model as well. And in order to do that, I added a layer right beneath the model. And just like before, by pressing Ctrl or Command, I clicked on the model layer which loaded the selection. And in this layer, right beneath the model layer, I filled the selection with a lighter shade of orange, which I thought was the perfect highlights for a sunset. And just like what I did with the grass, I moved the layer a little bit to the right, which kind of created this nice golden rim light. And have a look at that. That makes a lot of difference, right? And then I went ahead and did the exact same thing for the lamppost on the left, and then the lamppost on the right, reducing the opacity of the layers whenever it was necessary. And I also did the same thing for the lamppost far out into the background as well. And finally, I added a few more elements and I made some more adjustments in camera or filter, and this is the final image.